Question: can a wax museum be a scary location for a horror film? Answer: absolutely. Howdy folks, so the other night I watched another Vincent Price movie. I think this is now the third one of his I've watched this year alone. Just can't help myself, I just keep dipping into the man's filmography from time to time, but apparently this was a notable one because House of Wax was the point of Price's career where he moved away from doing quite versatile work into being more of a straight horror guy. So going forwards, I don't see myself watching any movies featuring Price from before 1953, from before House of Wax. I'll probably just slowly move my way more towards the future from this point on. I've not actually seen any other House of Wax movies. There are a few of them. It's not like one big series though, it's just something that gets remade every now and again. This 53 version is not even the very first one. I believe there's one from earlier, from maybe 1932, The Mystery of the Wax Museum. And if we go far into the future, to close to the present day, there was also one with Paris Hilton in it. Apparently she was bad, but the rest of the film is actually pretty decent. I don't know how many there are in total though from all through the decades. And like I said before, I've not actually seen any of these prior to me watching this one the other night, although I did watch a very similar film called Tourist Trap once, from the early 80s. Brilliant film, wouldn't mind reviewing that actually one day. And I did once watch an episode of the Supernatural TV show, which was based pretty much on House of Wax. It was a rip-off of the idea, albeit it was squeezed into a 45-minute runtime. Now, I was a little bit surprised by the plot of this Vincent Price version, because I was expecting it to be just him running a wax museum and he's putting bodies into models, covering them in wax, murdering people. And it would be up to like a few protagonists to slowly bring him down, albeit the death count would rise throughout the movie. And I guess it is sort of that, but not until the second half of this. We get a really long origin story before then with a few other different things happening. So at the beginning of this, Vincent Price's character, who is called Henry Jarrod, he's running a wax museum, but it's a perfectly legal establishment. There's nothing bad going on, and he himself is a decent individual. His museum is full of historical figures like Joan of Arc and Oliver Cromwell, or is that Bernard Cromwell? I always get mixed up. The problem Jarrod has in these early stages is that his business partner is, shall we say, all about the wonga and less about the wax model conveyor belt conga. I like that. So one day the business partner decides to set the museum on fire and claim through the insurance, and this absolutely breaks Jarrod's heart. I mean, the guy literally starts setting fire to models when Jarrod is in the room, and in the ensuing chaos, Jarrod can't quite get out before his face ends up getting hideously scarred from the flames. He's presumed dead for the longest time, but then later in the film, he comes back and opens up a brand new wax museum, except this time there are two crucial differences. So his experience with his other museum has turned him evil. Like he's not the same person now, and he doesn't want to waste hours in a workshop making models with clay. He just goes out, kills people, and covers them in wax. So once we get to his second museum in this film, that's when he's doing what I would have expected him to do almost from the start. The second difference is that whereas with his first museum he was just using historical figures for the exhibits, second time around he's still doing that, but at least half of the museum second time around is more stuff to do with the macabre, more horror themed models, so on his various tours, he's saying things like, oh, look over here, you'll see the first woman to ever die on the rack. And if you look over there, you'll see a model of the first guy to ever have his balls ripped off by a Spanish inquisitor. It's much darker, the second museum that he sets up. So from this point of the film, it's up to a few various people to try and bring him down, such as some police detectives and a young woman called Sue. Sue is not the most glamorous name for a lead character in any movie. I've got to say that this was back in 53. Doubtless names were very different back then, but when I think of the name Sue, I only really think of two types of people: dinner ladies from school and middle-aged women who sit on supermarket checkouts. But just in the spirit of trying to get into this movie, I tried to watch it whilst pretending that Sue is a really attractive, sexy name. The film was directed by Andre De Toth. I don't recognise any of his other work, but you know what? 1953 is really pushing it for me when it comes to my usual viewing habits. I watch a lot of films from the 60s and 70s, not so much the 50s. The 50s is more of a rarer thing with me, so I'm not that familiar with the actors, directors of the day. When it comes to the actors in this, we've already talked a little bit about Vincent Price. There's also this guy I did recognise who plays a character called Igor, who is like the right-hand man henchman of Jared in the second half of the movie. I looked at this guy a couple of times and thought to myself, he looks the spit of Charles Bronson from The Great Escape. For some reason, though, it didn't even occur to me that it might actually be Charles Bronson. I think possibly because Bronson wouldn't normally be in horror films, so my brain kind of rejected the idea, maybe, outright. So imagine my surprise after this film was over. I checked the cast list and realised that actually, yeah, Igor was played by Charles Bronson in what must have been a very early role, because it's a small-ish part for Bronson and he's got no lines because he's playing a deaf mute. But this film doesn't feel like it's made for horror fans. I'm not even sure there would have been horror fans back in 1953 as such. It feels like a movie that's made for people who just watch general movies, and this particular week at the cinema there's something a bit darker going on. I'll give you a couple of examples. So halfway through this there's an intermission thing that comes on. It's not a big deal. I've seen it. I've seen this in movies before, and usually what happens is it'll be gone after 3 or 4 seconds, but obviously back in the day when the film came out, an intermission would have actually meant an interval, and the film would have stopped for 5 or 6 minutes. Now, in my mind's eye, the other night when I was watching this, I pictured people going to the cinema in 53 and having to do a proper intermission, and maybe they'd all be upper class wearing fancy clothes and they'd go out into the foyer to get a coffee or something, and I just pictured somebody saying to the other, "Oh, it's a bit dark this, isn't it? It's not like Gone with the Wind." And there's another thing as well that made me think of this whole point, and that's the fact that there seems to have been a conscious decision when editing this movie to try and lighten it up a bit, but instead of doing what people would do nowadays and maybe just throw a few funny lines in, a bit of comedy or maybe even a bit of titillation or something, with this film they throw entertainment in, like general entertainment. So at one point, when Jared is opening his new wax museum, he's got this guy out front with like a paddle and ball and string just whacking this ball, and it's meant to be like some kind of cheap little, circusy bit of entertainment. It's annoying as hell to look at, but maybe punters back in 53 would have found it entertaining, I don't know. But not just that, there's another scene where a couple of characters need to do some exposition, but instead of have them do it to each other on a street corner or in a cafe, they've actually put these two characters in like a big variety entertainment show with dancers on stage doing the can-can and things like that, and the camera really makes sure that you see a lot of this entertainment. It's like the people behind this film had a mandate to make sure that loads of entertainment is thrown in of various sorts so that the film doesn't get too dark. But there's some weird stuff in this, like when Jared has to go out on a night to kill people to bring the bodies back to his museum. He dresses himself up almost like Darkman, and he crosses rooftops with like a rope. He's swinging like Indiana Jones. Then he goes into somebody's window and he's just about to get someone, and then there's a noise that startles him and he runs off. And it's almost like a silent movie, but with noise. And it doesn't quite feel like the proper way to do horror films has yet been inventive. And some of this stuff is really off, but just to sort of be fair on this movie, there's an earlier scene in the streets where Jared is running around and there's a really tense chase, which genuinely would work in a more modern horror film. But there's some bizarre stuff in this. The ending, for example. So I'm going into spoiler territory now when it comes to the ending, but this film is 68 years old, so give me a break. The cops all swarm on Jared's museum at the end, and he falls into the vat of hot wax, and that's his demise. Sadly, his head doesn't pop out of this thing, just so you can see it melt like it's a Sam Raimi film. That would have been pretty good, but once he goes into the wax, that's it, he's gone. But before then, all these cops come in. There must be like 10 of them, and he's just fighting them off with hand-to-hand combat. Like, cops are just flying all over the place. I was thinking, how is he doing that? I mean, at the start of the movie, he can't even best one 60-year-old guy in a one-off fight. It's like being burned in this fire has suddenly made him like that guy from The Raid. He's got fighting skills and stuff. There's a few funny little things throughout this movie which, if I watched the film several times over, I think I would come to really appreciate as things that are just so bad they're good. This film is at its best during the museum scenes, whether that be the initial museum or the one later on. The opening scene in the film, which is quite long, it goes on for at least 10 minutes, I would say, that's absolutely fantastic. There's some great stuff between Jared and his business partner. It's absolutely heartbreaking having to watch Jared see all of his models burn down, and the fight between him and his business partner is fantastic. They've made such an effort with the pyrotechnics in this. It genuinely feels like the actors are fighting in and around flames. It doesn't just feel like the flames have been interposed over the top of other footage. Is that the right word? Interposed? Probably not. But this opening is great. And then the film moves into a slightly dodgier middle section where we kind of bounce from one character to another for a while, eventually settling with Sue. Now, I wasn't bored during this second act, if you like, but I was certainly leaning forward at times, like just desperately trying to keep up with where the hell the story was trying to go. Sue's living situation with her friend is kind of bizarre. I get that I'm a 21st century guy watching a 1953 movie, but I don't understand the strategy going on with these two women and their living situation. They're renting what looks like an expensive place, but they've got no jobs, and it's revealed that Sue has been skipping meals because she's got no money, and it's not particularly healthy looking to me. And her friend is going out, not trying to find work, but trying to meet a rich guy. I think Sue mentions having a job interview in this, but the whole situation they're in is just really bizarre. I can't imagine women in the modern day setting themselves up like this. Also, Sue runs away from this building at one point, and it turns out she's got friends living like just across the street. I actually thought they might be her young-looking parents when I first watched this. But if she's got these friends living over the road, couldn't she just like rent a room off them for a while until she gets herself on her feet? I like to overthink movies a lot of the time. But once we get to the second wax museum, things pick up again, and the pace is pretty decent for the rest of the movie. There's lots of exciting stuff. I love all the work that's gone into the models. There is some fantastic set design in this. Vincent Price is awesome, as you would expect, although I think he's done even better performances in some of his later films. And the ending, even though I was taking the mickey out of it earlier, it is exciting. It just so happens that it's both exciting and funny. I genuinely did fear that a certain character would get beheaded in the guillotine, and I also thought that Sue might bite the bullet at the end, because the camera leaves her. She's underneath this set of equipment with hot wax about to come on her, and I thought that it might be a bittersweet ending where we cut back to her and it turns out she's been covered in this stuff. But the bittersweet thing is she at least solved the mystery and managed to get Jared arrested. But no, it turns out nice in the end. But it's really exciting watching this kind of situation play out and wondering, will the cops get there in time? It was pretty good. I liked it. I think the film on the whole, it's not destined to become one of my all-time favourites. It's got a lot of charm to it. Like I said, the production design is really, really great. They obviously didn't have much of a horror blueprint to work from, because certain things in this definitely would have been chiseled out and improved upon had they tried to have filmed the exact same script, say, I don't know, even 20 years later in like the early 70s or something. But it's quite a nice film. I did enjoy it for all the little laughs that it gave me. It's going to be very interesting for me to see if I end up preferring the Paris Hilton one when I eventually watch it, or this one. So we'll just have to wait and see. Oh, and did I mention that this was originally shown in 3D when it first came out? What? Why? So I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. Here is my Blu-ray copy of House of Wax. Picture quality is absolutely perfect. It's really good. Audio is decent as well. And there are quite a few features on this version. There's a documentary called House of Wax, unlike anything you've seen before. I've not actually watched that. There's a commentary by David Duvall and Konstantin Nasser. Now, I did sit down to watch this, half of it anyway, and then I was just too tired to watch anymore. I'd already watched the movie before the commentary. It's a little bit scripted for me, this commentary. I prefer it when two blokes just sit there and talk naturally. They're just sort of making it up as they go along. They're letting their passion sort of take over, if you like. This felt like two blokes sat there with loads of stuff they've already pre-written out, and maybe it was spliced together a little bit, but still very informative and interesting. And I would have finished it off if I'd have had a little bit more time. There's also a newsreel. I don't actually know what that involves. Theatrical trailer, and there's also the 1933 Warner Brothers feature of The Mystery of the Wax Museum. So this might actually be the original House of Wax film, if you like, actually included on this version. So I might just have to check that out. Going inside the slipcover and into the box, there's two discs for this. There's a DVD and a Blu-ray, and also, this is quite cool, don't always get this, some postcards of the actual movie, which, you know, just something extra to enjoy. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what score I'm going to give this. Just throw that away. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I think that's fair. And on the whole, I'd say I just about really enjoyed this film. I'll certainly keep it. I've got no plans to get rid of it or anything like that. It probably did sound at several points throughout this film that I was sort of taking the mickey out of it. And it is very easy to sort of point at things that are, you know, not quite right because it was made quite a long time ago. But there's a lot about the film that I did really enjoy as well, and I'm certainly looking forward to exploring more of the House of Wax universe, if you like, watching the various different versions from over the decades. So I'll be back soon with another Vincent Price review. This is certainly not going to be my last, so until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.